All right, can everybody hear me?
Yes.
All right, hello, and good evening. How's everybody doing today?
Good.
Very awesome, very awesome, very awesome. We're going to talk about your interviews a little later, just to see how they all went. Thank you all for turning those in. I'm sure that they're amazing and packed with amazing insights about the communities that you all went into. But today we are going to be covering the aspect of community and how that coincides with journalism and where the journalism industry is right now. I want to start this class off before I talk or before David talks, before anybody else talks. I wanted to bring in a guest speaker who is really one of the most interesting people doing community journalism and working at one of the best places doing community journalism right now, an investigative news outlet called ProPublica. Some of you may or may not have heard of it, but they've broken some really big stories in the past, and their work has a really big impact. And a really big part of that is the community engagement aspect of their work. So a quick rundown of today's class. I'm going to have Terry Parris Jr. From ProPublica talk to you all for a few about some of the stuff that they're working on currently at ProPublica and involving their audience in, and some of the things that they've done in the past where they've involved their audience. Then afterward, I'm going to say a few things, and then we are going to do a quick debrief of how your interviews went, and then David is going to do a quick, or not a quick, but a thorough multimedia workshop, and then we're going to give you all your next assignment. Yeah. Terry, I'll give you the floor whenever you're ready to go. Yeah, this is Terry Parris Jr., you guys.
So, hi, how's everybody doing?
Hi.
So, where are you all? Is this is this West Virginia something, or I can't remember. Just tell me who I'm talking to. You don't have to introduce yourselves, but where am I right now?
Morgantown, West Virginia. Back in Baltimore, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. So sorry, Terry. The class is in. Well, we have one class in West Virginia University in Morgantown, and then the other class that's Googled in right now is at Morgan State in Baltimore. So kind of two sides of the U.S.
Okay, so I'm Terry Parris Jr. I'm the community. Actually, I am no longer the community editor. I was promoted to engagement editor, which means I just basically do the same thing. Just sounds maybe a little bit fancier. So I'm going to talk about. I guess I'll talk about some of my projects that I've worked on. You know, it's really hard to talk about engagement in this idea of like it's really important and it's interesting and you should just do this because it feels good and you incorporate the community. I tend to not, while I think it's really important and we should have manifestos, I tend to think of or try to talk about this stuff with examples of the work that I've done, and so that's what I'll do. I'll run through a couple of examples of successful projects or projects that I have, I have been interested or I've been excited to work on here at ProPublica, and then maybe I'll talk about one that I worked at in Detroit Public Radio, and then I would just love to take any questions that you have because then I don't have to do like all the talking. You guys can chat a little bit too. So, but before I get into it, let me just tell you a little bit about how I got here. This won't take too long, but I went to Wayne State University in Detroit, Michigan. I'm from Metro Detroit. That's true. So I went to school for journalism. When I graduated journalism school, I thought that I was going to work on the Metro desk of the Detroit Free Press. That's what I wanted to do, and that job didn't exist, and I don't think it exists today, really. And so I ended up working for this digital media startup, and I was I started as an intern. I moved up to news editor. From there, I was there for 3 years. I ended up at Patch.com, which probably a lot of you may have heard about. I was an editor for a couple sites in Michigan and a couple sites in the Bay Area in California for a couple of years. And that's really where I started thinking about community journalism, how the community, it's interesting, Patch gets shit on all the time about, a bunch of different things, but really that's where I started to, basically out of resourcefulness, like I couldn't cover everything myself, and so I started to rely on the community to help me kind of build stories or tell stories or figure out ways in which they could help me tell their own story. And so from there I became a community editor at Ustream for news and sports, and Ustream was a media company for a second. It is now just a live stream company. It was always just a live stream company, but they did have this media component to it for a second. And then I ended up in Harrisburg, Pennsylvania. Hold on one second. I'm in here. Sorry, it's a busy room. So I ended up in Harrisburg, Pennsylvania at a newspaper called the Patriot News. I was a community engagement specialist there, and I led a small team. I did some crowdsourcing projects, but it was mostly just comments and social. From there, I went to WDET, and I went back home, essentially, and was a digital editor there, working on engagement and trying to make the radio interesting on the internet, which proved so difficult that I ended up leaving that job and coming here to ProPublica. And so I've been at ProPublica for 2 years. So what do I do here? I work on I essentially run our engagement campaigns, not social like daily social distribution stuff, like your Twitter and your Facebook, although those are important. We have somebody, a colleague of mine, Adam, who works on that stuff. But I work on longer-term engagement projects. I work on a lot of crowdsourcing projects. My goal here really is to figure out ways in which the community that we're reporting about, the story that looks at the community that is going to be mostly impacted by our story, I try to figure out different ways in which I bring them into that story so that they have a way or an avenue to tell their own story, but not engagement for engagement's sake, right? Not just tell me your story, right? Like I want to figure out a better way to where I can use this idea of tell me your story, but then also take that story and apply it to our investigative reporting or our journalism. So it's not just something that is just so let's bring them into the thing. Like I really actively try to. I can't launch an engagement campaign unless I understand how what we're doing actually fits into the investigative reporting, right? Like I don't want it just to be send me your picture of, I did so much of this when I worked in Daily News. Send me the picture of your kid's first day of school and I put it in a gallery. Or send me a picture of your Thanksgiving turkey. It probably looks so great. Let's put it in a gallery, right? Like moving beyond, that, figuring out ways in which contributions can be used for investigative reporting. So, with all of that said, I will jump into some of the projects in which I think we've accomplished some of this. Unless anybody has any quick questions about the 7 minutes that I just rambled for. No? Okay. All right. So I guess I can. I don't know if it makes sense. I'm not going to screen share. I'm just going to talk about the projects. You all have the links to the things that I probably will talk about. Agent Orange, potentially Agent Orange, the WhatsApp thing that we did in Liberia. Maybe if I get to election land, I actually will talk about that. And then if I can get to it, maybe the Detroit Park Watch. Do you guys, John, you sent all those links, or I sent you the links, you'll send it to them?
I'm gonna drop those into our Slack channel right now.
Okay. All right. So let me start with this my investigation that I've spent really the last year on, or over the last year, is this investigation in which we and again, if I'm talking too fast or I say something that doesn't make sense, which sometimes it makes sense to me, but it maybe doesn't make sense to anybody else. Just stop me and say, can you please clarify that thing? So the first project that I'll talk about is this investigation in which we are investigating essentially how Agent Orange has impacted the children and grandchildren of Vietnam veterans, right? So this war was more than 40 years ago. Agent Orange was a dioxin that was dumped on the land to kill the foliage, so the enemy couldn't hide. But this was a cancerous kind of this was a carcinogen. This was a dioxin, and so we do know the effect of Agent Orange on the veteran. But we were looking for we are investigating how this actually impacts the children and grandchildren, which is it's an already muddy issue when you're talking about how does Agent Orange impact veterans. For example, illnesses associated with Agent Orange exposure are things like prostate cancer, Parkinson's, and type 2 diabetes. These three illnesses have something that is very common in that they affect a lot of old men, and Vietnam veterans are a lot of old men, and so there's a lot of like, it's just a really muddy issue to get into, right? There's not a yes, no, or a black and white. So already the generation that is directly impacted, that question's kind of hard to answer sometimes. The subsequent generations, their children and grandchildren, are even harder to answer, right? And so, but anyway, so we wanted to investigate this story. And if you are all familiar with ProPublica, most of the time when we investigate something, we investigate like all of a sudden there's a 25,000 word story dropped in your email box, or you see it on social, and that's how we kind of do. That's how we do a lot of stories. We start the engagement, or I'm not gonna say we start the engagement, but it always starts with this like big bomb of a story. But with this one, we didn't have that, and we didn't start with that. What we started with was merely a question that said, help us investigate how the children and grandchildren had been impacted by Agent Orange exposure. So we really had no idea where we were going with this story when we launched it a year ago. But we opened it up. I like to call it like investigating out in the open, right? We said, please tell us how you have been impacted, right? Tell us these stories. And we launched it with a 40-question structured call-out, so essentially a questionnaire, a form. And as of today, we've had almost 6,000 veterans and their family members fill out this structured call-out. I mean, and this is not something where you are clicking yes and no, and I'm a veteran or I'm not a veteran. This is like 40 questions of qualitative, tell us about your children, tell us what you did, tell us how you think you were exposed. And this, by far, has probably been one of the largest crowdsourcing projects for story, right? Like, there's been a lot of crowdsourcing projects for data points, but for story, right? Figuring out, having people tell you a story and then you doing something with it. This has probably been one of the largest projects that I can remember in, in the last, 5-10 years. And so, so I look at that, I'm like, oh, that's awesome and that's great. And we've used a lot of those stories to tell, we've used a lot of the community stories to tell more, like to actually dive into the journalism. We've told almost 17 stories so far, 17 investigative pieces, and nearly every single one of those stories has a source from our structured call-out or a crowdsourcing form. But the question becomes like, how did you even get to that level, right? How do you even get to 6,000 stories submitted or contributions? And that's where really this idea of, for me, like community engagement really lies, right? Over the last, I don't know, year or so, I've started to think about my job a lot differently. I'm a journalist. I will always be a journalist. But really, when I look at the success of this project, it comes not. I mean, it's steeped in journalism. But what I'm really doing, or what I'm really, if I'm clear about it, what I'm really doing here is I'm a community organizer, right? I'm a community builder, and I'm finding ways to build that community, not around a campaign or an advocacy issue, but around journalism and around a topic that is being deeply investigated, right? And so what did I do? For this particular project, I do, there's four main things that I do. there the first thing that I start off doing is I research. Right? I'm going to make a note because I have to send. I'll actually send you. I did this post that breaks this all down. But one of the first things that I do is I research the audience. I figure out who are in the community. I figure out who they are, where they are, how they get their news. Right? Like I figure out who the advocacy groups are, who the big influencers are. Right? And so if I'm thinking about veterans, I'm thinking about the American Legion. I'm thinking about the VFW Hall. I'm trying to figure out who and where these veterans go to get their information. So I started talking to them. I started explaining them the project, why this would be important for them to help me distribute it. Not in partnership, not ProPublica is partnering with the American Legion, not ProPublica is partnering with the VFW Hall, but I go to them and I say, hey, VFW Hall, you have a lot of veterans, and we are trying to investigate this issue and tell a truth out of this issue. Can you help us? And they were totally down with it. The other thing that I do is I quickly realized after talking to veterans that they, through research, is that they get a lot of their information from Facebook groups, not Facebook pages so much, but groups like all of these communities, Vietnam veterans, Air Force branches, et cetera, they coalesce in these Facebook groups. That's where they get their information. So I went and searched and found, more than 100 different veterans Facebook groups, and I joined or tried to join every single one of them. And I ended up joining 75 Facebook groups, and that has completely changed what my Facebook feed looks like. I barely recognize my Facebook feed anymore because of all these Facebook groups, right? And so, and I joined these groups so I could understand how they talk to each other, what they're saying to each other. Also, I would actively engage in these groups saying, we wrote another story. This is what this story says. I'm not like confirming or denying whatever conspiracy they have or whatever issues they have. If they have an issue, I would say, hey, have you seen this thing that we're working on? But I would get in there and I would try and be among the community as much as I could to share our stories, to request information, to share and distribute the forum in which we created. And a big part of these two things, essentially these two things is what contributed to us reaching nearly 6,000 contributed stories from veterans and their family members. So there's research, right, figuring out who the community is, where they are, how they get their news, who are their influencers. There's outreach, right, engaging in these communities, like talking to the VFW Hall, or whatever community that you all are investigating or looking into. Like if they all have their groups of people that are impacted by what you're doing, you just have to find those people. The second thing was outreach. The third thing is a content plan. Like figuring out if I'm doing an engagement project, I can't, like, let's say it was Agent Orange, right? I couldn't just create a structured call out, this 40-question call-out, and publish it on June 23rd, 2015. And then between June 23rd, 2015 and today, not do any type of reporting or any type of journalism or do any type of, engagement whatsoever, right? Like we said from the beginning, if we're going to launch a call-out, we have to figure out what we're going to do between, launching the thing and the big, deeply long 25,000-word story. So that's smaller stories, that's news you can use, that's aggregation of different types of things. For example, I quickly learned that there's a lot of veterans who have information, and there's a lot of veterans who don't have information. And the people who have the information have a better chance of getting benefits from the VA, and the people who don't have almost no chance of getting benefits from the VA, right? So I thought, well, I kept getting all these emails from the veterans, from this community that I've been building, saying, I need information. Or I'll get an email that says, I have information, what can I do with it? And so what I did, one of the posts that I did is, one of the posts that, sorry, people keep coming in here. It says in use. I don't know what the hell. It's messing with my flow. Anyway, so I was getting questions that said, I need information. I was getting emails that said, I have information. And so what I did is I went and I found a list, or I got a list of all of the ships that served in Vietnam during the war, right? And what does that mean? The definition is getting some sort of Vietnam Award medal, right? That says this ship served in Vietnam waters. And I put them all on a page on our website, and I used that annotation software, Rap Genius, and I said to the community, and I sent them a message. I said, okay, anybody who has information on any of these ships, highlight your ship and tell us what you know, or upload the document, or send us a link to that thing. And I said, anybody who is looking for information, find that ship and either highlight it and say, I'm looking for information, or find the ship, and if somebody has information, is that what you need, right? And as of right now, and it's kind of one of my most favorite things, because I never thought I would use Rap Genius to do some investigative crowdsourcing project, but what we have so far is almost 500 notations from basically Vietnam veterans, from sailors. You know, a big part of those come from a power user, but when you start doing community engagement, you realize that that community is driven by a very highly engaged few, and that was definitely the case for this. But still, like almost 500 notes on these 700 ships has been pretty incredible. So that was like part of this content plan, right? Like making sure that we're regularly doing something that essentially keeps the heartbeat of the community alive. Like every time we did a piece of content, it's like my heart beating. And if you don't, you know, if you launch a project and you don't do anything, your community is going to die. Your project's going to not be successful. So that's the third thing, was content plan. The fourth thing, which is really important, is this idea of a feedback loop, right? As you collect stories, as you bring things in, as you launch, maybe it's a structured call out, maybe it's something else, like you're collecting things from the community that will help you tell your story, right? It is very important that you are regularly reporting back out to them, and not just stories that are published on ProPublica or whatever news organization you all end up working for, but how are you communicating to them that you hear them, you see them, you're there, you're getting this stuff in, or you're, whether it's that or whether you're just probing them for different types of questions or different types of queries to the community itself. So for example, what does that all mean, right? For example, what I regularly do, or what we have regularly done, is of these 6,000 veterans and their family members, I try to send them messages on a regular basis that says, hey, here's an update to what we've done, or we're doing this story about X. Does anyone who has or has had bladder cancer or hypertension or hyperthyroidism, let us know. Or I'll just send an email like, hey, what's the latest? What's the update on your whatever? One thing that I was interested in is like all of the different Facebook groups that all of these veterans participated in that helped me find a lot of them. I sent a message out and I said, hey, tell me where you get your news. Is it Facebook? Is it something else? Just send me a message and let me know how you get what that keeps you informed. And every single time we send a message, or as we've been building this, and every time now we send a message, I get hundreds of responses back to my email. Some that I can get to and some that I can't. Sometimes I just simply say, I'll send I'll read the damn thing and I'll send them an email that says, oh, whatever, like, thank you for sending this thing, or, good luck at the hospital. Like, I try to respond to every single one of these queries. It takes a lot of time, but ultimately, the community development part of this project, which has really lasted longer than a year, has helped us do better journalism. It helped us understand who this community is, how to reach them, and even for the most media-centric idea of what measurement of journalism is, I have a highly engaged audience that every time I write a story, every time we write a story now, I can drop it in, I can send it directly to these 6,000 people, and I know that most of them are going to read it. So the question is, well, how engaged are they really, right? Here's an example. Here's the final example that I give of how engaged they are. Then I'll go on to another project. I'll take some questions, then I can go on to another project. But so think about it like this, right? We have, and there's a ton of stuff that I'm not getting to, but I only have so much time, and you can always reach me after the fact, and I can fill all the holes in. But so think about it like this: we have 6,000 contributions from veterans and their family members. About 4,200 are strictly veterans, right? The other 1,800 or so are family members, spouses, brothers, children. Of those 4,200, we wanted to dive in a little bit deeper to the issues that their children are facing. So you are a vet, you have a child before, you have 2 children before you went to Vietnam, and 2 children after. I want to know how healthy your 2 children were before and how sick your 2 children were after, right? Because they were exposed and came back and, you know, had children. And so of those 4,200 veterans, about 3,100 or so had children before and had children after, right? So so it's like a segment. It wasn't just children after. It was both before and after. And I specifically wanted to talk to that segment of this population. And so what we did to dive deeper is I actually created a secondary survey, one that dove deeper into this question of how healthy or how sick your children, right? It's another 40 questions or so, and I sent it out to those 3,100 or those 3,200 veterans, and I said, hey, fill this out. These are a couple more questions. A couple more questions actually meant 40. You know, I want to figure out. We're about to get to our second part of this investigation. I want to dive deeper. So most people know that, like, if you can get like 1% of your community to participate, that's awesome. If you get 5%, that's crazy. If you get 10%, you should get a promotion. We have so far had nearly a quarter of everyone that I sent it to fill out this secondary survey. So maybe that's why I got a promotion. But so like 25%, like of this 3,200 or 3,100, I've been able to get 25% of them to fill out this secondary survey that's 40 more questions, right? Like, this takes time. Like, it doesn't take an hour, but it takes time out of their day to do this thing. And so, you know, I mean, so when I think about this project and all the things that we've been able to do and all the reporting that we've been able to do, including getting the VA to recognize that they need to do more research, which is actual literal impact from this investigation, the thing that I think that I'm most proud of is the fact that I was able to get, through community building, 25% more people to participate in a secondary survey that will further help the second part of this investigation. There's a whole lot I could talk about, like, I could dive way deep into that, but I only have like 15 to 20 more minutes. But is there anybody, before I go on, I have like 5 other things that I could talk about, but like, does anyone have any questions specifically about this investigation that, I don't know, that they're questions. Does anybody have any questions?
Could you talk about privacy for a minute, Terry? Because this is like really like personal stuff that people are sharing with you. You know what I'm saying? Like, so how did you? Because I know sometimes, like, when people create these databases, sometimes, you know, they make them public with the actual information. But I know with this one, you all were really serious about privacy. Can you talk about that for a second?
Yeah, I mean, as you all know, here, public privacy is extremely, extremely important to us. It should be important to everybody, but privacy in terms of like contribution is extremely important, right? The community has to know, even if there's responsibility here, because people will give you information and they don't even know. Like, even myself, there's so much about me on Facebook that I don't even know. Like, I've basically given up on, like, Zuckerberg knows so much about me, right? But if I like, we have to. It's on every one of our crowdsourcing forums. We say at the very top how important privacy is to us. That we would never use. We would never. Clearly, we would never sell or give any of that information to third-party organizations. That nothing will ever be published without their explicit permission. On top of that, the software that we use and the site that we have is HTTPS, which I'm not exactly sure what that means. All I know is that it's encrypted and it's secure, And I would have a hard time asking people to share all of this information without knowing that the site and the platform that we use is as secure as possible. But ultimately, what gets down to your question is, technology aside, you have to be explicit and transparent and truthful and about what and where all of this information is going, how you're using it. For example, I'm really interested in like networked and distributed reporting. That's where I take crowdsourcing stories and try to get other reporters across the country to report about them. We have a question on our survey that says, would you mind or are you interested in having your story shared with other reporters? And if they say no, we don't share it. And if they say yes, we share it with other reporters. We also vet those other reporters too. But yeah, so privacy is super important. It should be at the top of everything. It should be explicit. You should be transparent. You should regularly reiterate if you're talking to somebody, you're sending them an email. Make it clear at the very beginning where that information is going, what you're using. Because if someone says, "Hey, don't use that in a thing," and you use it in a thing, I mean, you've
betrayed them, yeah.
Yeah, you busted that trust, and so yeah. Does that answer the thing? Does that answer the question?
Yeah, it does. Thank you.
Anybody else? Any other questions? Yes.
When you were reaching out to people for information on the ships, what program did you use? I didn't hear.
I'm sorry. What program do we use to do crowdsourcing?
Rap Genius? Is that what you?
Oh, so to do our crowdsourcing forms, we use a program called Screen Door. Rap Genius we only use to annotate that one particular story, which you will see a link for. Rap Genius is this annotation software, which is actually pretty badass.
Yeah, it's pretty good.
But we use, for crowdsourcing purposes, we use a platform called Screen Door. Screen Door is basically, you can do crowdsourcing with Google Forms, and I used Google Forms forever, and they're really user-friendly and for a reporter, easy to use, put together. But Screen Door is a much more robust tool. When you're using Google Forms to crowdsource, if you get to 50 or so, you kind of start losing track because it just looks like a spreadsheet with a bunch of stuff in it. Screen Door allows you to really, the interface is pretty incredible. It allows you to sort, it allows you to create labels, it allows you to segment and search in ways that Google Forms does not. You can create statuses and you can assign, like if I have 10 stories that have that are a Marine who has bladder cancer but doesn't get benefits, I can highlight those 10 stories and send them directly to the reporter who's working on the project, right? In Google Forms, it's kind of the Wild West of information. It's in a spreadsheet, but you start losing stuff after a certain point. You start losing stories. You start not being able to kind of get in there and get your hands dirty and really understand what you have. Through Screen Door, it allows you to do that a little better. Now, when you get to 6,000 stories, I've only gone through 11% of those 6,000 stories or so. I mean, that's like less than 600 or whatever, right? There are, 5,400 stories in our database that I don't really know exactly how or what they are. So we do a lot of harvesting. We have these ideas, or we get ideas from the community, or we have ways, we have avenues that we want to start digging into. We will go and start searching through the database for these particular stories. We call it harvesting, right? And through Google Forms, I wouldn't be able to do it as well as I can do it, or as finely as I can do it in Screen Door. Like I can do search queries. I can say, Navy vet who has no benefits, who served in Korea, who has bladder cancer, and I could find that set or that that search query term or whatever. So long answer longer. Screen Door is the platform that we use to crowdsource. So anything else? Any other questions? No? Okay, so I'll talk about. I guess I'll talk about a new project that we are. No, you know what? I'll talk about this WhatsApp project we did 2 years ago, and I have like 15 minutes. So 2 years ago, we did this. So we're the team investigation is really like starts with community and it's embedded in community, and it is it is the first thing that I think of when I think of the Agent Orange project. Hold on, I can see. Okay, good. Now I can see. I was just seeing John's blank screen. It was creeping me out. So now I can see the class, which feels much more natural. So where the Agent Orange story investigation starts with community, this WhatsApp project actually came at the end of the investigation, but it was engagement in a different way nonetheless. So to set it up, we 2 years ago we did this investigation on Charles Taylor, who was a warlord in Liberia in the 90s, and what he did is he basically took over the country. He assassinated the president. He had this rebel army. He had child soldiers. They terrorized parts of the country. Inside Liberia, there was a company called Firestone, this iconic American company that made tires and rubber, right? Rubber for tires. And they had a plant. They had the largest rubber plant in the world in Liberia. Their plant itself was basically the size of Chicago. It was an enormous plant, right? So they were operating in Liberia. Charles Taylor takes over. He is a warlord. There are, he does all the things that warlords do, right? They basically terrorize the country. He ends up kicking out Firestone. Firestone quickly realizes that they are losing money, millions of dollars by the day, because they can't operate in the country and tap the rubber trees to make their tires. And so they essentially give Charles Taylor millions of dollars so they can operate in the country. They can continue to operate in the country. So essentially, Firestone, this iconic American company, in a way, really funds Charles Taylor's warlord, army, right? So all of that aside, it's 25,000 words. Read it. Full disclosure, I couldn't read all of it. I think I read a few of the chapters, but I got the gist, right? So anyway, so we wanted to figure out so who is the community that would be impacted by this? I really should, kind of dive deep into this investigation. We really wanted to find a way to get to Liberians, whether they are living in Liberia or whether they're expats living in the United States. And ProPublica doesn't have a Liberian audience, right? Like, we're not like a big Liberian publication. And so if we wanted to engage this Liberian community, whether they are in Liberia or not, we would have to find a different way of doing it. And so a different way of doing it doesn't mean distributing our stuff on our own Twitter handle with a hashtag Firestone in the Warlord or Liberia or whatever it is, or our own Facebook page or whatever, right? We had to find a different way to get to this community, and so we knew that WhatsApp is widely used around the world. We knew that WhatsApp is widely used in Africa. We also know that WhatsApp is widely used in West Africa, and so we decided to figure out how can we take this giant 9-chapter investigation, break it up, put it into WhatsApp, and then put it in front of Liberians. And so I took WhatsApp, and I immediately, this comes in the research and outreach portion of everything that I do. I immediately start looking for where are advocacy groups in Liberia? Where are nonprofits in Liberia? Where are Liberian or West African media sources? Where are those media sources here in America? What forums, internet forums do Liberians or expats from Liberia participate in? Are there any Facebook groups? I created a spreadsheet of all of these different groups, right, and who to contact or whatever. And I just started, emailing people, mass emailing people or targeting emailing people, like from my own email account, not MailChimp, tiny letter style, like, hi, I'm Terry, I'm this guy, and I'm doing this thing, and I would love if you help us do this thing. And so I reached out to all of these people, and some newspapers put the thing in their printed paper. Some Liberian newspapers did that. Some companies and some advocacy groups or nonprofits or whatever posted the link to the WhatsApp page and the WhatsApp number if you text in, if you chat us warlord, we will get back to you, and we will send you bite-sized information from this investigation. We will answer your questions. You can ask questions directly to the reporter, and he will respond to you. So that was the idea, and that was the plan. And so what ended up happening is I actually ended up getting a lot of buy-in from a lot of places that were Liberian-focused, whether it was here in America or abroad, mostly in West Africa, mostly in Liberia, and we ended up getting something like 175 plus, so 175 to 200 people subscribe to this warlord broadcast list. Of that 175, about I can't remember the number. About 60 of them were from West Africa, and of that 60, like 40 of them or so were from Liberia, like actually in Liberia or Liberian expats, right? And the way I figured it out, it's a little bit muddy, but the way I figured it out was either through country code or just through straight-up conversation saying, where are you from? And I tracked all this stuff because WhatsApp doesn't allow you to track it, so I created my own spreadsheet to track all of these things. And so you might be sitting there saying, well, 175 people on a thing is not actually all that successful, right? I would say that it's wrong because the goal of the thing was to get Liberians engaged in this. I didn't say 100 million Liberians. I didn't say 10,000 Liberians. I just wanted to see if I could get Liberians engaged in this fucking thing, right? And so I found all of these, like I was through research and outreach, and my soft skills, which I think are probably the best skill I have is this soft skill, like sending an email to somebody saying, hey, help me do this thing. Smile on my face if it requires a smile. And so we were able to get the highest, and I tracked engagements too, right? I tracked our conversations. I tracked how many times I had conversations with people on WhatsApp. And so, like, through that tracking, 40 of the people that I had conversations with were Liberians. And what was so great about it, though, is like it wasn't just them like sending a text and receiving information. It wasn't just me distributing to them. What it was is they were asking us questions. They were recording on their phone and sending us a recording of their voice. I was hearing their voices of what they wanted to know, or if they could clarify some idea or some topic or something that had to do with this investigation. And then we would have our Pulitzer Prize-winning reporter, T. Christian Miller, and I say Pulitzer Prize-winning reporter because he was willing to engage each and every single one of these people who asked a question. He was sick, he had a cold, he would record himself answering these questions, and I would take that and send it directly back to that person, right? So we had this, I'm sort of getting goosebumps just thinking about it, but like we had this really interesting dialogue, this one-on-one dialogue. I see a vein in my head popping out, but like this one-on-one dialogue with people in Liberia and our reporter answering and asking and answering questions, and then we would take that exchange, them asking and T answering, and broadcast it out to the larger group, and also put it on our website. And so, I like talking about these two projects because on one end, I talk about this project where we were able to get 6,000 people, a big, huge number to do something. And that's awesome, and they're highly engaged. And to me, that's a success. And the other end of the spectrum is I only got 175 to 200 people to do this thing. But the core of that thing was exactly the people that I wanted to talk to. And I understand that, I have the privilege, and I'll end it on this, and I'll take a couple questions, but I understand that I have the privilege of saying that and doing these projects here at ProPublica. You can't really do these everywhere, especially if you have a small, tiny newsroom, especially if you work, let's say, I have a lot of friends who work at Gannett, but if you work at Gannett and it's really commercially driven, they might be thinking about page views and not trying to get 40 Liberians to participate in this thing. But that doesn't mean you shouldn't try, and that doesn't mean that the methods in which I have been talking about can't apply to journalism and storytelling, different types of storytelling across the board, right? It doesn't have to just be the three sources, even though I think we're moving so far away from that anyway, but there are other ways to do good journalism to do good community engagement, and to try and inform and help people too, right? Like what's it saying, like your cake and have my cake and eat it too, or something like that? It's something like that, right? So that's what I feel like I'm doing. Like I get my cake. Is that a saying? It's a saying, right?
Yeah.
Right? It's a saying. Like that's what I feel. But anyway, I just want to acknowledge the fact that you're probably sitting there being like, I won't be able to do this if I work for NJ.com or Advanced Newspapers or whatever it is. But you could, like there's methodologies in approaching community and journalism that work. You just have to, and it does take time. Like the currency you have is just badass projects, and if you can do a badass project that includes the community, you should do it. Maybe you should work a few extra hours to do it if you can't do it, and work for a nonprofit or whatever. But anyway, like I'm going down a tangent, but I understand. Like you're like, oh, you might work at ProPublica, and that I get that question a lot. But the methodologies that I'm talking about, you can use to do really awesome community local journalism as well. So does that all make sense? Or is that, yeah?
Yeah.
Is there any questions? Any more questions?
Terry, could you talk again about because I think too, like when people hear about like these big community involved projects or these community engagement center projects, people think like you need the 6,000 people to submit, or you need 8,000 stories on patient harm and safety, right? I mean, could you talk about, like, again, just quality more than quantity? Like, if you get 10 really, really good people over 50 really, really, not so interesting people. Yeah.
Right, sure. I mean, I think it's all about it doesn't have to always be the biggest audience. It just has to be the right audience, right? Like that sort of gets at to what the WhatsApp project is, right? Like it would have been awesome to have 10,000 people on that thing and like all of that stuff. It's awesome to have 6,000 stories, but really, like, quantity is awesome. Like I always say, this is like raves are super fun, right? I actually don't like raves, but like the idea of a rave is super fun. 10,000 people in a shitty warehouse somewhere with glow sticks and dancing, and that's like awesome and fun, and you have a great night. But nobody wants to live there. Nobody wants to live at a rave, right? You want to live in your home. You want to live a place that has a garden, that has a community, that you know your neighbor. And that's what I'm trying to do. I'm trying to build like that block that has like people who are engaged in journalism, who trust each other, who like can be part of this story, can help me do this story, can help me do the investigation, right? Like that's what I want to build. The rave is like BuzzFeed and virality and all of that stuff, and 70 billion page views a month is awesome and great and super important. I'm just not interested in it right now. That doesn't mean and that doesn't mean that it's not important. I'm just really trying to build, that block, right? Like I just want to, put pylons at the end of the street and invite everybody out to have a barbecue, basically.
Yeah.
That's a weird analogy. Did I answer the question? I'm not sure if I answered the question.
No, you did. You did. Okay. Also, I think too, like one thing you all do really, really well is not only creating stuff that you all can use as journalists, but also creating resources that your audience can, in turn, use as well, right? Yeah. If you could talk a little bit about that, that'd be great.
Sure. I just had to send a Slack message to somebody. Okay, so, yeah, I mean, that's really, so this is really, really interesting and important to me moving in the next year, in 2017, because you think about, like, crowdsourcing is great, right? Building community is great. Collecting all of these stories is great. Having 6,000 veteran stories, or 450 workers' comp stories, or 800 rent stories, these are all great, but really, if you think about it as one single newsroom, it is an effort and waste. ProPublica will not be able to tell all of those stories. We will not be able to read all 6,000 of those stories, right? And so what we are trying to do is create a way, create methodologies or different ways of taking these 6,000 stories, right, and telling our investigation, but finding reporters across the country, segmenting those stories, right? Like, let's say there are 60 stories of veterans from Iowa. I want to be able to take those veterans from Iowa, find a reporter in Iowa who covers the military, who covers veterans, whatever, and say, listen, we did this enormous story on Agent Orange. This is how you could talk to the VA if you want to do stories about Agent Orange. This is how some of the groups that you would want to talk to if you want to do stories about Agent Orange or veterans. On top of that, there are 60 people that are to be directly impacted by your reporting that you can use as sources, right? So we can do this because we work with everybody. We're super collaborative. But I really want to figure out ways, when I collect 6,000 stories, how can I break that up and share that with reporters who are interested in telling similar or doing similar investigations across the country. That includes writing reporting recipes, what we call reporting recipes. Those are like points and like 1, 2, 3, 4. That kind of here tripping me out. So 4 pillars that kind of put you on a path to continue telling the Agent Orange story, but with our sources. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Okay. We call it distributed reporting. We call it network reporting. It's basically taking things that we collect, contributions that we collect, segmenting them, chopping them up, and sharing them, or finding ways to get them into the hands of reporters across the country. Right. So sharing is caring. That rhymes. So.
Okay.
What else?
Okay. Cool. Does anybody have any questions for Terry? I know he covered a lot.
No?
All right, great, Terry.
I'm sorry, I have a question. I was going to let the students ask, but if they don't have anything. Hi, I'm Trisha Kelly, and I'm working with this class. I guess I was just wondering, like, how do you determine what investigation needs to be done now, and what's obviously you're part of the planning process in terms of engaging the community once something's decided, but while you're in the process of determining, this is what we need to cover next, how does community engagement become involved? Or are you like, nope, that audience?
How do we determine if community engagement is going to be a big part of investigation or not, right? Is that what you're asking, right?
Yeah, and kind of the process of determining what investigation.
Yeah. So for us, it starts at the very beginning, right? Like, we are generally almost always in the room with the reporter and the editor as like stories are starting to be born, right? And so it's my job to say, and this is something that should be, like, you all should know, is that not what I'm talking about doesn't fit every single story, right? Like, put a square peg into a round hole. Like, it's not always going to be something that you can crowdsource, or the community or whatever. But it's really just on those things. Sometimes it doesn't work, and sometimes it does. I think it's 2 things, right? Like, I think if the community harmed, ignored, or feels ignored. For us, when I think about in crowdsourcing, I want to think of those 2 things because they want to tell the story. So, like, harm or patient safety or whatever, they feel like that community clearly is harmed, right? They clearly have a story to tell, or some kind of story that they want to tell. They also feel that the medical process, for the most part, is listening. So that project, which collected almost 1,300 stories, has been quite successful. For Agent Orange, it's the same thing. It's Vietnam veterans who absolutely feel harmed, that their government has let them down, and that that on top of that, the VA is ignoring them. Those 2 things, and so then we look at questions like, our Wall Street reporting, it's just not going to make sense for us to do a human-driven crowdsourced project, or even some of our privacy reporting, right? Like, we're looking into algorithms right now, and like all the different things about algorithms. It doesn't, there's not a real true element there for, like, figuring out someone who's harmed and ignored and wants to tell our story, and how are we going to use that then to further this investigation, right? But for Agent Orange, it makes sense. For patient safety, it makes sense. For workers' comp, it makes sense. And we're doing this investigation on New York City rents, it absolutely makes sense, right? We do stuff on like the DEA and the cartels. I guess there's probably a way I could figure out to do a crowdsourcing project around it, but it's not as ripe as other ones, right?
And extremely dangerous. and extremely dangerous.
Oh, there's also that, I guess. But I mean, it's news judgment, right? It's news budget, right? You have to make decisions on things, and when you make decisions on things, you wanna make sure that community, that community is interested in telling that story. And also, like, this is also really important, is that I'm committed. Not only am I committed, but my reporters are committed too. Like, we are committed to the thing at the beginning, because if we start dying off halfway through, it's going to kill the thing, right? Like, it's not gonna hit. It's not going to be as successful as I need it to be, or it's not going to, it's not going to. Successful as I need it to be is a terrible phrase. Pretend I never said that. It's not going to be. We're not going to be able to give it the time or fulfill the promise of the community spending time to participate in something that I would, if we were all committed, that we would be able to do. So, does that answer your question? Yeah. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
So I'll do 2 more minutes. If you have any questions, if not, I'll take off. But if
no questions? Okay. All right.
All
right.
I'll say one last thing.
We got one.
Did you say that you previously used Google Forms to collect data? Okay.
Yeah. I used Google Forms for like 4 years, crowdsourcing, until I started here, where they use Screen Door. But Google Forms, I mean, it's not about tools. It's about methodology. Like, there's ONA is coming up in a couple weeks, and that is a tool overload. You go there, and like everyone's talking about the new fucking thing, and you're like, my brain is going to explode, and I can't do anything about it, right? So, like, I have a hard time. Sometimes I have a hard time at ONA because of this idea. Like, if you have a mindset and a methodology, it doesn't matter what the tool is. Tools help you do it better and easier, but it starts with, like, how are you going to do it? Where is your mindset with it? And so, like, Google Forms is a great place to start when crowdsourcing, and it's free and it's easy. And if you, like, are like, I finally figured out all the limitations of this thing. I need something else. That's when I say start thinking about buying something or purchasing something, or Screen Door. Although Screen Door does allow you to do like one free project, and I mean, I love it. Like, it's changed the way I crowdsource, and you should all check it out. So yeah. Cool. I just want to say one last thing is that, oh, I'm sorry, did you have another question?
I guess I was just concerned about security. Like, we had the discussion about that, so I...
Sure. So you had to, like, using Google Forms or using Screen Door?
I'm using Google Forms. Like, if you're cool with that, it's fine.
Yeah, I mean, Google is secure as well. I mean, it is a secure, it's also a secure platform. So I'll say the last thing is, if there's any other questions that you have, John, if you could send my email around, feel free to reach out to me, or if I skipped over everything or was too crazy or whatever, please reach out, okay?
All right. Terry, thank you so much, man.
Yeah, no problem. I'll see you guys. Good luck in the future.
Thank you.